Misty air pressed on the stone steps, and I stood in the back of St. Bartholomew's with a folded note pinched between my fingers. The church smelled like wet wool and old wood polish. My heels clicked once on the tile and then stopped. I kept my head down and found the last pew, the one near the draft where the door kept sighing open. I slid in, clutching that note for my father's casket. My palms were damp, the paper softened at the crease. The choir warmed up with a single held chord that hung too long. I watched ushers pass the glossy programs with his smiling photo. My name wasn't anywhere. I didn't look for it, but I still checked. I didn't take a program. I kept the note inside my fist like a small anchor, the ink already bleeding from the drizzle outside. Lillian turned in her seat 2 rows ahead, pearls tight at her throat. She looked me over once, coat, hair, shoes, then let her voice carry. "Back pews are for visitors, Maya. Family sits up front." Heads shifted the way they do when a hymn ends. The sound in the room changed. I felt the first heat in my face, the kind that climbs your neck before you can swallow it down. Whispers rolled along the pews, quick and busy. "Isn't she the nurse's kid?" someone breathed. "From the first wife," another added, almost kind, almost curious. My jaw pressed shut. The edge of the bench dug into my thigh. I straightened my skirt and kept my eyes on the hymn numbers. My heels felt glued to the floor. Every movement seemed loud. Grant's laugh broke the line of murmurs. He leaned toward a friend and let it slip just enough. "She loves a headline." His cufflink flashed when he pointed his chin my way. I didn't flinch. I just felt my shoulders climb, inch by inch, to protect my neck. The note in my hand bent, and I heard the soft crack of paper fibers giving up. I stood. I didn't make a speech. I didn't ask permission. I stepped into the aisle and moved toward the front to place the note where it belonged. An usher slid sideways and raised a program like a little fence. He didn't touch me, but he didn't have to. His mouth stayed polite. His body said no. The choir restacked their chord as if searching for the right key, and in that stretched sound, Lillian lifted her chin. "Don't turn pity into spectacle today." She didn't whisper it. It landed with a clean shape. The program in the usher's hand trembled. Mine did too. Something low in the room tightened, leather shoes against tile, a cough swallowed halfway, bracelets touching. My throat closed. Breath went short and thin. I didn't argue. My body told the truth for me. Fingers opening, shoulders falling, eyes burning hard. The note slid out of my grip and dropped under the hymn rack with a dry whisper. I felt the stupid instinct to kneel and reach for it, to crawl toward it. I didn't. I stayed standing, knees hot and weak, while the quiet held me in place.
The rector stopped at the end of the aisle. He looked left, right, and then at me. He didn't say my name. He didn't say anything. The choir cut off. The first row waited for someone to decide what to do with me. I swallowed and tasted metal. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I moved my gaze to my father's photo on the program. Navy blazer, summer sun, a look like a joke was coming, and I felt my mouth twitch. Then I stepped back. I reached for the end of the pew and gripped the polished wood until my knuckles changed color. The usher lowered his program, relief passing over his face like a quick shadow. I took one step back, then another, my heel sliding on damp tile. The music finally started, the organ deep and steady. I let it push me toward the door, like it was meant to be part of the service. Cold air met me in the vestibule. Someone touched my sleeve on their way in, then pulled their hand back fast, like I was too hot to handle. I pressed the door lever with the flat of my palm and stepped outside into the fine drizzle. The Spanish moss on the oaks hung dark and heavy around the courtyard. I breathed in that green, wet smell and forced my shoulders down. My umbrella opened, then flipped inside out on the first gust. The metal spines turned like fish bones. I laughed once, short and ugly. A bell somewhere started counting the hour, slow and steady. I walked across the lawn, the soft earth giving way under my heels. My calf muscles worked to keep me upright. I didn't look back at the stained glass windows. I didn't check if anyone followed. Water slid off my hair into the collar of my coat, and I shivered hard enough that my teeth clicked. I told my hands to stop shaking. They didn't listen. At the curb, traffic hissed over wet asphalt. A couple from the service hurried past me, heads down. The woman glanced up and half smiled, then caught herself and looked away. I wanted to say, "It's fine." I wanted to say nothing. I stood there with the dead umbrella and watched a funeral limo pull up, shiny and black, like a period at the end of a sentence that didn't belong to me. I walked to the side of the church where the azaleas still held their color against the rain. I pulled a tissue from my coat, useless and damp, and wiped my palms anyway. The door opened behind me. Shoes tapped the steps. No one called my name. I stared at the brass handle of the side door until it blurred. I could feel the pressure in my chest, that push you get before a cry breaks. I didn't want to give them that sound. I took a breath through my nose and held it until it hurt, then let it go slow. A pickup rumbled past and threw a splash onto the curb, speckling my stockings. I brushed at them pointlessly. "You don't belong here," a voice said as two women brushed by. They didn't look at me long enough to be sure who I was. They didn't have to. Their steps quickened. My stomach pulled tight. I swallowed it down and made my face flat. The service hymn drifted through the cracked window. "Nearer, my God, to thee," thin through the rain. I stood there and listened until the last note faded. My shoulders dropped a notch. My hands finally found stillness at my sides. The wind turned and came up the street, salty from the river. For a second, everything in me went quiet. I walked to the curb and wrestled the umbrella back to shape. The latch clicked. I shook water off gently and set it over my head. My shoes made dull thuds on the pavement as I crossed to my car. A magnolia bud lay crushed near the tire, white and bruised. I bent to pick it up, then let it be. I opened the door, slid in, and sat with the engine off. Rain pecked at the windshield in a noisy, nervous pattern. I pressed my thumb to the steering wheel until the skin blanched, then released. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't rush to answer. The buzz came again, persistent. I pulled it out, rain spotting the screen, and swiped. "Maya Bennett," I said, voice low, steady enough. "Ms. Bennett, Daniel Ruiz." The line hummed soft between us. "Your father left sealed instructions for you alone." My grip tightened around the phone. Water dripped from my cuff and tapped the console. 1, 2, 3. I stared through the wet glass toward the church doors and said nothing. The engine stayed silent. The rain evened out. I breathed once, slow, and listened to the pause that followed his words. The air went still between words. I leaned. Grant's phone lit up. He angled it so I could see the incoming messages, fast and bright, links, headlines, a photo of the house I grew up near, not in. Lillian pointed at me like I'd been caught in a hallway. She camped at the hospital to rewrite history. My jaw pulled tight. Ruiz glanced at me. I breathed once, long enough to loosen my voice. "I camped there because no one else did." Their lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll file today." He sat finally and lined up his pen with the folder. Lillian didn't take her eyes off me. "You embarrassed him. You embarrass us now." My hands wanted to curl into fists, so I folded them on my knee instead. Ruiz spoke without heat. "You're entitled to file. We'll respond through the court." My phone vibrated hard against the wood. One buzz, then another, then a constant rattle that made the coffee ripple. I turned it face up. The Savannah Sun-Ledger push alert stared back. "Nurse's daughter in hers ward fortune." A text from a church volunteer slid in over it. "They're calling you a taker." Another message. A group thread where my name sat naked between exclamation points. I set the phone face down and pressed it into the table until the vibration dulled. Lillian reached for the will. Ruiz put a finger on the paperweight. She paused, then smiled like she'd forgotten something kind. "You think he meant this?" Her eyes pulled over me, slow and mean. "He wasn't himself." She pushed him. Grant leaned back. "Let's not pretend she's family." The insult prickled along my neck. I felt heat jump into my face. My shoulders rose on their own. I stood. The chair legs scraped. "I'm leaving now," I said to Ruiz. He nodded once. The muscles in my forearms twitched. I slipped my phone and keys into my coat pocket and walked to the door. Lillian stepped aside like I had a smell. "You live off others and still act proud." My breath broke short. I gripped the handle, opened the door, and kept moving. The hallway felt colder. The elevator took too long. I watched the numbers creep down and counted them with my tongue pressed to my teeth. In the mirrored wall, I caught the red at my throat and smoothed the edge of my collar like I could erase it. The doors parted. I stepped in. A junior associate followed, then pretended not to recognize me. We rode 3 floors without speaking. At the lobby, the glass spun me into the wet morning. The rain had settled into a fine mist that coated everything with a quiet shine. I ducked under the overhang and checked my phone. More alerts. Ward Air General Will. Civil war in Savannah's courtrooms. My name felt heavier each time it scrolled past. A call came in from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The next call wasn't unknown. Hospital HR. I answered and listened as the director cleared his throat 3 times. He used words like optics and pause and supportive of the process. I kept my voice even. "Is this unpaid?" He hesitated. "For now." I nodded at the rain. "Got it." He tried for kindness. "We have to protect the hospital's reputation." I ended the call and put the phone in my coat. My hands shook, then steadied when I pressed them against the brick. Back upstairs, Ruiz texted, "Come back, we're finishing the filing." I swallowed the taste of metal and returned to the elevator. When I walked in, Grant and Lillian were still there. The lawyer was dictating to a paralegal who nodded too much. Ruiz pointed to the chair beside him. I sat, back straight. He slid a pen across. "Initial here and here," he said, soft enough that only I could hear. My hand shook once, then steadied on the second line. Grant leaned in. "You got lucky." Lillian didn't glance at me. "Luck runs out." I exhaled through my nose, slow and controlled. Ruiz placed a printed press statement in front of me. "Say nothing," he murmured. "We litigate facts, not comments." I nodded. The paralegal moved her chair and cast me the kind of look people reserve for traffic accidents. I felt something rise in my chest and clamp there. I kept my face still. My phone rattled again. A headline glowed. "Ward's son speaks, protecting father's legacy." Grant had posted a statement. The comments were all velvet knives. "Gold digger, hanger-on, nurse nobody." Friends from school liked the post with red hearts, the kind that looks pretty from far away. I rubbed my thumb across the screen and didn't press like on anything. Ruiz's receptionist knocked and peeked in. "Press downstairs," she said. 6 cameras, 2 radio." Ruiz nodded and closed his eyes for a second, as if he were pressing a stamp into wax. He handed me a glass of water. Sip. We moved through signatures, form after form. I watched the ink settle, blue and final. A courier came for the first set. Ruiz tapped his watch, and the man hurried out with a canvas bag. Rain streaked the window in narrow lines. A barge horn moaned from the river. I rolled my shoulders back and felt the stretch catch along my neck. The receptionist returned with an envelope. "For Miss Bennett." I opened it with my thumbnail. HR again, this time in writing. "Unpaid leave, effective immediately." They thanked me for my service in the second paragraph. In the third, they regretted the decision. I folded the letter once and slid it under my phone. Ruiz saw it and nodded to show he'd read enough in my face. I stood to leave again. Lillian's mouth pulled. "You're nothing without our name." My stomach clenched hard. I reached for the back of the chair and felt the tremor in my wrist. Ruiz spoke to the room without raising his voice. "That's enough." Grant laughed under his breath. "Truth stings." I looked at him and didn't blink. The laughter stopped first. The rain eased. The river brightened a shade. I picked up my coat and buttoned it to the top. Ruiz walked me to the door. He didn't offer a speech. He just placed his hand on the frame, steady as a post, and held there for a beat. I nodded once and stepped into the hall. Halfway to the elevator, my phone lit up with a final text from Ruiz. Judge assigned. I turned back toward his office. He met me in the doorway with a sheet he'd just printed. Judge Naomi Keller will preside, he said. Fair, measured, unshakable. My shoulders lowered a fraction. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and pushed it down until it stayed. I reached for the elevator button. Ruiz didn't move. He looked down at another file, eyes scanning fast. His expression shifted, surprise first, then focus. He lifted his head, called my name, and crossed the hall in 3 quick steps. He held out the page, finger under a single line in a corner note I hadn't seen. This connection, he said, breath tight with urgency, eyes steady on mine. It might change everything. The courthouse steps gave off a chalky smell after the morning wash. Reporters moved like a tide, cords snaking across the marble, microphones lifted, flashes popping at random. I took the curb slow, one hand on the rail, the other on the strap of my bag. A breeze carried azalea scent off the beds by the sidewalk. It should have been nice. It wasn't. People pointed and whispered, then pretended they weren't looking when my eyes met theirs. Grant's black SUV rolled up like the start of a parade. Doors opened in sync. He stepped out in a navy suit that fit like it knew him. Lillian followed, one hand already on his sleeve, smoothing the cuff with a mother's precision. They held for the flashes without speaking. He tilted his head just enough for the cameras. She adjusted his tie. It looked practiced. It felt like the first blow of the day. A reporter called out, loud and clean. "Did Maya deserve any of it?" Grant chuckled like the answer was obvious. "She barely knew him." The laugh carried down the steps. I heard it in my chest. Another boom of shudders answered him, like applause. A few people near me laughed under their breath. "Ward blood stays with ward blood," a man muttered to his friend. Lillian turned to the line of microphones. "Grant is the Ward legacy," she said, "the son his father raised." She smiled at nothing, as if she could see the headline floating in front of her. The press loved it. A camera swung toward me. I kept my face still and stared past the lens at the carved date on the courthouse arch. Ruiz found me at the bottom of the steps. "Right side entrance," he said low. "Steady pace." I matched him. A woman leaned in as we passed and said it like a kindness that cut. Some people don't know their place. My breath snagged for one beat. I didn't look at her. I pressed 2 fingers to the strap on my shoulder and kept walking. Inside, the air went cool and dry. Shoes clicked on tile. The guard pointed us through. Ruiz set a palm on the back of my chair at counsel's table and slid it out for me. "Don't react. Let them talk," he said, voice level. I sat and lined my pen up with the legal pad. It helped to give my hands a job. Opposing counsel opened with an easy tone. Ms. Bennett was estranged until the money reappeared. The line hung in the room like steam. I swallowed and kept my gaze on Judge Keller. She didn't blink. "What support did Ms. Bennett receive from the wards?" she asked. Lillian lifted her chin. "We paid a semester of community college," she said, light as weather talk, "out of kindness." I felt the pen dig into my finger. I loosened my grip and raised my eyes. The note with the check said, "Don't embarrass us." Ruiz rose. "We have exhibits for context," he said. He handed up a binder and clicked the screen awake. The first image filled the monitor on the side wall. Grant, at 18, sun on his face, a cake as big as a tire, the dark shape of a yacht behind him. He held up a drink. Someone out of frame was cheering. You could almost hear it, even in the quiet. Grant shifted in his chair and rolled his shoulders back like he owned the memory. The second image replaced the first. My uniform torso at the hospital cafeteria window, my hair up in a clip, a paper hat folded wrong on my head because I was new to that station. The timestamp matched the date of the yacht photo. The gallery went still. No one needed the caption. No one asked for one. I felt my heartbeat climb and then level off. The air in my nose felt cold, sharp enough to keep me awake inside my own skin. I rested my palms on my knees so I'd stop rubbing my thumb over the edge of the pad. Across the aisle, Lillian blinked twice and rearranged her face. The movement was small, but it read like a flinch. Opposing counsel tried to sweeten it. "Different paths," he said. "Different opportunities, yes, but proximity does not equal relationship." He said it like he'd been practicing in a mirror. Grant relaxed again, as if the room had come home to him. Judge Keller looked at me. "Ms. Bennett, keep answers concise." I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice landed without wobble. Ruiz leaned a shoulder into the table near me. Not touching, just there. I could feel the line of his attention, straight and steady. A reporter in the second row raised her brows at me and waited. She didn't ask a question, she just held my gaze for a second longer than polite, then typed with a new focus. The page of my legal pad blurred for a moment. I blinked hard, and it cleared. Lillian spoke again, this time softer, almost pitying. She lived off our name when it suited her. The line slipped out like a knife wrapped in napkin. My jaw clicked. I let the anger show in one breath, then pressed it down with a swallow that hurt a little. Ruiz stood at once. "Objection to character smear." Judge Keller didn't look up from her notes. "Watch your phrasing, Mrs. Ward." A cough came from the back. The bailiff shifted his weight. I got a sudden urge to stand and walk out just to feel air, Grant muttered toward his lawyer, not quite under his breath. "She's turning this into a sob story." The words slid across the table to me. Heat rushed up my neck. I leaned an inch forward. "Say it louder," I said, low. Ruiz tapped my sleeve with a finger you'd miss if you blinked. I sat back. I laced my fingers together and pushed my thumbs hard against each other until the urge to yell passed. Judge Keller looked around the room like a teacher, waiting for order after a bell. "We will keep this about documents and acts," she said, "not status." The room softened a notch. A bird called somewhere outside, faint through the windows. It sounded out of place here and somehow right. The clerk handed up the last of the exhibits. The judge reviewed them one by one. Paper whispered. Shoes creaked. My pulse eased enough that my ears stopped ringing. I stared at the line of light under the door and counted 3 long breaths, then 2 shorter ones. My hands finally cooled against my knees. Lillian cleared her throat and tried one more time. "She wants what she didn't earn." The insult landed clean. My spine stiffened. The hush that followed made it hit harder. Ruiz didn't stand this time. He turned his head just enough for me to see him, then looked back at the judge. His face said the same thing he told me on the steps. Let them talk. Judge Keller capped her pen. "We'll take a brief recess," she said, "and resume with additional testimony." People stood. Benches groaned. Reporters slipped out fast for hallway quotes. Grant brushed a speck off his sleeve that wasn't there. Lillian leaned to his ear. I looked down and smoothed the fold of my skirt until the fabric lay flat. I could feel the spike of humiliation begin to cool into something steadier. Not pride, not yet. Just balance. The kind you find on a moving train when you set your feet right. Ruiz rose, straightened his jacket, and pushed in my chair halfway like he always did. "Hold here," he said quietly. "We're ready." The bailiff called the room back to order. People settled with the little thumps of folders and bags. I set my palms on the table and felt the faint vibration of the building settling around us. Ruiz stood, buttoned his jacket, and faced the judge. His voice didn't reach for drama. It didn't need to. "We call our next witness," he said, measured and calm. "Ms. Ora Whit." The side door opened. Ms. Whitfield walked in, slow, back straight, purse tucked under her arm like it mattered to keep it safe. Her hair was silver and neat. She took the oath without looking down, then found the chair and eased into it with care. The microphone picked up the soft scrape when she pulled it closer. "I served the Ward family for 24 years, she said. Her voice was warm around the edges, but steady. Grant looked at the table. His jaw worked once. Lillian crossed one leg and rested her hands on her knee like she was framing a picture. Judge Keller nodded. "You may proceed." Ruiz kept his hands behind his back. "Ms. Whitfield, did you observe Ms. Bennett with Mr. Ward during his last months?" "I did," she said. "She fed him when nurses rotated out. She changed linens. She kept a log and checked his meds when the night got long." The typing slowed in the press row. I bent my head and pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to stop it from shaking. Ms. Whitfield turned her face toward me, just a little. "She never left him alone," she said. Lillian leaned into her mic. She angled for sympathy and a signature. The sentence snapped through the room like a ruler on a desk. The back of my neck heated. My fingers curled until my nails bit my palm. Ms. Whitfield didn't raise her voice. "You angled for board seats and photo ops." A few people sucked in air at the same time. A pen hit the floor and clattered. Grant's ears went red. He reached for a glass of water he didn't drink. Judge Keller tapped her gavel once. "Order!" Ruiz stepped to the evidence cart and lifted a binder. "Your Honor, Exhibit 22. He passed copies to the clerk, then to the defense. Ms. Whitfield opened her own set with 2 careful fingers. "These are the nightly vitals," she said. "Medication sheets. Call logs." She traced 1 line with her nail. "I called twice on the 14th, she said. "No answer." She turned a page. "He asked for you, Mrs. Ward. Maya told him you'd call tomorrow." She looked back at the paper. Tomorrow rarely came. A murmur rolled like a chair moving on tile. Judge Keller looked to Lillian. "Were you out of state during these dates?" "For fundraising," Lillian said. It came out fast, clipped. 14 days straight, the judge said. Opposing counsel stood, smoothing his tie. "Ms. Whitfield, you were fond of Ms. Bennett, isn't that fair?" "I was fond of the truth," she said. He tried a smile. Memories blur. She tapped the log with a knuckle. The paper doesn't. Lillian shifted in her seat and angled toward the jury rail that wasn't even in use. "She lived off our name and now wants the rest." The words landed sharp and mean. My throat tightened. I put both hands on the table and pressed until my knuckles paled. Ruiz didn't look at me. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, counsel's party is offering commentary." "Mrs. Ward," Judge Keller said, "mind the line." Lillian breathed out through her nose and leaned back. Grant stared at the corner of the room like there was something worth seeing there. Ruiz kept moving. "Ms. Whitfield, during this period, did you observe Mr. Ward's interactions with Ms. Bennett?" "Every day," she said. "He would wait until she came to start dinner. He'd tell her to heat the soup even when it was already warm." "And with his wife?" "He asked her to sit," she said. "She said she had calls." A reporter in the second row stopped typing and just watched Ms. Whitfield talk. I felt sweat start along my spine and lifted my shoulders once to shake it off. The wood of the table cooled my wrists. The pen under my palm was the only thing I let move. Opposing counsel tried to cut in again. "Ms. Whitfield, you were paid by the Ward family." "Your livelihood." She looked at him. "They paid for my work," she said. "This is my word." He blinked. "No further questions at this time." Ruiz placed a single receipt on the document camera. Numbers filled the screen. "Ms. Whitfield, can you identify this?" She didn't need to look long. "Caregiver fees," she said, "drawn by Mrs. Ward." "For which dates?" "While she was in Palm Beach." Grant's chair creaked. He cleared his throat, but no words came. His hand worked along the edge of the defense table, thumb rubbing a spot over and over like he could wear it down. Lillian didn't look at the screen. She stared at the high windows and blinked slow. Ms. Whitfield closed the binder and folded her hands. "He loved his daughter." No one spoke. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Some member of the press shifted, and the leather made a soft pop. A pencil rolled off a bench and hit the floor with a tick that jumped. Then stillness again. I could hear my pulse in my ears, and then it faded. The judge broke it first. "Ms. Whitfield, you may step down." "Thank you," Ms. Whitfield said. She stood, steadied herself with a hand on the rail, and walked off the stand at the same pace she came in. As she passed our table, she touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. It wasn't for show. It was a small promise. I was here. Grant leaned toward me just enough for his voice to hit. "You're dragging his name through mud." I turned my head. "I sat by his bed," I said. His lip curled. "You're playing nurse for the cameras." Heat flashed through me. My chair scraped an inch. Ruiz's hand pressed the tabletop near mine, firm and quiet. I set the chair back where it was. The anger peaked and broke. What was left felt solid. Judge Keller gathered her notes into a stack and capped her pen. "We will keep future testimony within evidentiary bounds," she said, sweeping the room with a look that took in the press, the benches, the parties. "This court values acts over optics." Lillian exhaled through clenched teeth and shifted her pearls, like they had turned rough. The bailiff announced a short recess. People stood and then didn't move, unsure if they should talk. Reporters slipped into the hall, speaking into phones with their hands over their mouths. I stayed seated and smoothed the crease in my skirt one more time. My breathing steadied. My hands cooled. The shake settled into my fingertips, then left. Ruiz leaned toward me. "You did well," he said. I nodded. She did better. He allowed himself a small smile. She told the room what needed telling. The recess ended. We stood again. Judge Keller took her seat, and the room fell back into that careful quiet. She looked from one table to the other, then down at the stack of exhibits. She spoke without hurry, each word placed exactly where it belonged. "Before ruling," she said, "this court will mandate a handwriting and capacity review." The words landed clean. Pens started again. "I reviewed all signatures," he said. No flourish, no smile. Keller leaned forward a fraction. "Your conclusion?" "All signatures are authentic," he answered, "executed with consistent motor control." The words landed and stayed. Paper stopped moving. The press row went quiet enough that I heard a watch beep somewhere. Lillian didn't speak. Her lips pressed together like she was tasting something sour, then shaped a quick smile toward the gallery. Opposing counsel rose. "Margin of error?" "Minimal," the man said. "No indication of tremor or assistance." "You considered age?" "I did," he said. "The motor pattern is stable." Grant shifted in his chair. The sound of leather rubbing against fabric reached me like a whisper. He looked at the clock, then at his lawyer, then down. I kept my eyes on the witness. My hands warmed against the table. The second witness took the stand, an older physician with neat handwriting on the nameplate. He swore in, then rested both hands on the arms of the chair like he'd learned not to fidget. "I evaluated medical notes and cognitive records," he said. "And your opinion?" Ruiz asked. "On the signing dates," the doctor said, "Mr. Ward had full decision-making capacity." Two reporters turned to each other in the same small motion, then faced front again. Lillian stared at her thumbnail and scratched off a bit of clear polish. Grant exhaled through his nose. His chair clicked back a notch. Opposing counsel tried a new door. "High emotion can distort judgment, doctor." The doctor didn't blink. "Emotion is not incapacity." Counsel smoothed his tie. "But pressure," Keller cut in, cool and even. "Emotion is not evidence." The defense sat. A throat cleared somewhere. A shoe tapped once and stopped. I rolled my shoulders back to loosen the knot between them. Lillian leaned forward just enough for the mic to catch it. "You've wrecked this family, Maya." Her words pricked across my skin like nettles. I turned my head, met her eyes, and spoke plain. I stayed when it fell apart. Grant slapped the heel of his hand on the table. The sound cracked. "You got lucky." He looked like he wanted to grab those words and stuff them back in. They stayed between us, ugly and... Keller studied the photo longer than she needed. "Is this the kind of manipulation you meant?" she asked Lillian. Lillian didn't answer. Her jaw fluttered once. She turned toward the window, as if the glass could help. Grant laced his fingers and locked them hard. His shoulders sank a notch. The tendons in his neck stood out. Ruiz returned to the lectern. "The porch timestamp aligns with medication entries logged that evening," he said. "The handwriting on the log matches the forensic sample." Opposing counsel stood, sat, then stood again. "No further questions for the witnesses at this time." The judge nodded. "Anything else?" "Nothing further," Ruiz said. I felt my pulse slow from a hammer to a drum. Not victory, not yet. Just weight leaving the wrong places in my chest. I pressed my thumbs together under the table until the tension left my hands. From the back row, someone muttered, "So she did the work." It wasn't loud, but it carried. A different reporter, the one who'd stared at me on day one, lowered her pen and just watched. Lillian found her mic again. "She lived off our name." The old sting flared. I didn't give it words. I closed my mouth, breathed through my nose, and let the heat cool. Ruiz's hand rested on the edge of the table, close enough to steady without touching. Keller scanned the bench like a teacher counting the class. We are not trying names, she said. We are trying acts. She turned to the experts. You're excused. The document examiner gathered his binder. The doctor nodded to the clerk and stepped down with a stiff knee. Chairs creaked as people adjusted. The hush didn't break. Ruiz rose again. A brief statement to frame closings, Your Honor. Go on, Keller said. Every test we asked for has been done, he said. Every test has said the same thing. The documents are real. The capacity was present. The intent is plain. Opposing counsel stood and tried for force. Intent can be colored by pressure. Prove the pressure, Ruiz said. We've shown patterns of contact, the defense said. Of absence, Ruiz corrected. He didn't smile when he said it. Keller capped her pen. Closing statements tomorrow, both sides by 6 p.m. She looked from one table to the other. No hallway commentary. No press step speeches. Lillian turned to me for one last hit. Without us, you're nobody. My stomach tightened. The back of my throat burned. I didn't offer a line back. I gathered my notes into a stack that didn't need stacking and slid my chair in with a small scrape. My restraint looked like control. It was closer to survival. The gavel fell light. People stood in pieces. A bench groaned. A handbag zipper hissed. It sounded like a room exhaling after holding itself too long. I pushed my chair fully under the table and got to my feet. Rant moved closer as if to block my path. Ruiz stepped between without making it a scene. We'll see you tomorrow, he told them. He didn't wait for a reply. I walked the center aisle, every step measured. The bailiff cracked the door, and a slice of hallway air found my face. It smelled like paper and cleaner and nothing else. I kept breathing until my chest stopped grabbing for it. Outside the courtroom, the corridor buzzed with controlled voices. Reporters hovered but didn't pounce. Keller's warning had landed. One of the clerks pushed a cart of files past me and nodded. I nodded back, grateful for a neutral face. At the elevators, my phone pulsed with stacked messages. HR silence, church gossip, friends who weren't anymore performing loyalty in public threads. I closed the screen and dropped the phone back into my bag without answering a single one. The doors opened. I rode down with a custodian who smelled like citrus cleaner. He didn't ask, and I didn't explain. The street gave me the humid slap of late afternoon. The river moved, dull and heavy. I crossed to the parking deck with my jacket folded over my arm and my case file under it. Halfway to the car, I stopped, set the file on the hood, and pressed both hands on the metal. Warmth soaked into my palms. I watched my breath fog a faint patch on the paint and disappear. By the time I reached my aunt's house, the sky had gone the color of wet slate. She met me at the door, searched my face, and just opened her arms. I let my cheek rest on her shoulder a second longer than I meant to. She didn't ask how it went. I didn't have to answer. Tea? She said. Later, I said. There's something I need to check. She nodded toward the stairs. Attic's unlocked. I climbed, hand sliding over the rail she'd sanded smooth years ago. The attic smelled like cedar and cotton. I pulled the chain for the light and crossed the boards to the old cedar trunk. My father's medical satchel sat where we left it, the leather worn soft at the corners, the buckle scuffed silver. I knelt, rubbed dust off the flap, and lifted it. Gauze, a cracked thermos, a penlight that clicked once and died. Then my fingers found a stiff edge tucked under the inner seam. I eased it free. A seal. I pinched the top with both hands. The paper gave a dry sigh when I lifted it. The stamp had browned. The glue line showed a pale line of age. I didn't rush. I slid a butter knife under the flap and lifted slowly so I wouldn't tear what was inside. My breath kept getting in the way. I set the knife down, pulled the letter free, and flattened it with my palm. The rain softened. I cleared my throat and read low, like he was in the next room and might answer if I spoke too loud. Maya, you were never a mistake. You were my courage when I had none. The words hit like warm water after a cold day. My chest pulled tight and then loosened in one slow motion. I reached for the back of the chair and held on with 2 fingers until my hand stopped shaking. I kept going. When they questioned your place, I stayed quiet, and I was wrong. When they told me to keep things simple, they meant to keep you out. You were the one who stayed. Tears started without warning. They weren't theatrical. They just came. My nose ran. I wiped it on my wrist and laughed at myself for it. I set the letter down and pressed my fingertips to the ink. The strokes had little hesitations where he lifted the pen. I could see his hand in them, old, careful, stubborn. The apartment smelled like coffee that had died on the burner and rain in the screen. I reached into the satchel and found the brass compass he carried when we took long drives out past the marsh. The lid clicked open. The needle steadied north and held. I placed it next to the letter and raised my eyes to keep the tears from spilling over again. It didn't work. They fell anyway. I read on. I should have defended you sooner. I saw you every day you sat beside me. I thought silence was peace. It was cowardice. You were my compass when I drifted. I said it out loud before I could stop myself. Hi, Dad. It came out cracked and small. I didn't try to fix it. I let the sound sit in the room with the hum and the rain and my messy breathing. I wiped my cheeks with the heels of my hands and took a sip of tap water that tasted like metal and relief. Find your north and keep it. I said it again, slower. Find your north and keep it. I didn't want to turn it into a mantra or a speech. I wanted to feel how it changed the air around me. It did. My shoulders dropped a fraction. My jaw let go. I folded the letter along its original crease, smoothing it flat with my thumb, and set it beside the compass so the two touched. The rain thinned to occasional drops. Pipes clicked somewhere in the wall. I got up, put water on for tea, and watched the kettle fog the window. It was late. I was tired. But the tired shifted from bone deep to steady, like work done and put away. I washed my face with a cold cloth and came back to the table. The letter waited without demanding anything from me. The night slid by. I fell asleep on the couch without meaning to, the satchel by my feet, the compass open on the table like an eye that didn't blink. When morning showed through the blinds, light came in thin lines and laid itself across the paper. The tears I'd left there had dried into small spots that caught the light. I didn't hide them. I poured coffee, black and simple, and drank half standing up. A knock came, soft. I opened the door to Ruiz holding 2 cups and a bag that smelled like cinnamon. He looked at my face and didn't tilt his head with pity. He just asked, "You ready for tomorrow?" I stepped back to let him in and tapped the envelope with a fingernail. He wrote it for the record. Ruiz nodded once. "We'll handle it right." We didn't rehearse anything. We didn't need to. I put the letter in a clear sleeve and slid it into a folder with a label I wrote, "Slow," so it would look clean. I closed the compass, heard the click, and tucked it back in the satchel. I put on a dark blouse, the one with sleeves that didn't ride up when I raised my arm. Ruiz watched the rain start and stop along the rail of the balcony. We didn't waste words. Back at court, the hallway was all hard souls and low voices. We went in during a lull. The courtroom smelled like paper and floor polish. I felt the old lift of nerves and wrapped my fingers around the folder until they warmed. When the clerk called our case, I stood. Ruiz rose. "Your Honor, we request to enter an additional document to show testamentary intent." Keller looked over her glasses. "Brief foundation." I stepped to the lectern and kept my voice level. "This is a letter my father left in his medical bag. He addressed it to me. He wrote it during the period in question, objection to sentiment," opposing counsel said, "too fast." "Intent, not sentiment," Ruiz replied. Keller held out her hand. "Entered as evidence of intent, not sentiment." I placed the sleeve on the edge of the bench. My fingertips brushed the plastic, then let go. Keller read the first lines. She nodded once, not to us, but to herself, small and certain. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "a single line for the record." I found the last sentence without looking down. "Find your north and keep it." No one reacted big. No camera flash went off. The room made a different sound, just the quiet of people letting something in. I heard a chair adjust and then stop. Someone coughed and caught it halfway. Lillian's pearls clicked once against each other. Grant kept his eyes glued to a fixed point on the table. Keller slid the letter back toward the clerk, voice even. "It will be considered as evidence of intent." She looked at me again and softened her tone. "Thank you." I walked back to the table, sat, and lined the edge of the folder with the grain in the wood. My hands weren't shaking. My shoulders settled in their sockets. Ruiz took a breath like he'd been holding it for an hour and let it out without a sound. He didn't say good job. He didn't have to.
We moved through the rest of the docket like people finishing a long day. When our matter came up again, Keller stacked her notes and spoke clean. "Verdict at 9 a.m. tomorrow." The gavel touched down and lifted. People stood. Benches scraped. I gathered my things without rushing. In the hall, the air felt cooler, cleaner somehow. I pushed the door open, stepped into the afternoon, and let the breeze find my face. My jaw wasn't clenched. My neck wasn't braced. I walked to the steps and paused, one hand on the rail, the other on the satchel strap. The city sounded normal. Horns, a bus sighing, shoes on stone. I breathed it in like regular air. I said nothing brave. I didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, I stood the way I wanted to stand. Morning sat soft on the courtroom wood, and for once the room didn't buzz. No crowd pressing the doors, no reporters calling names. Just that clean light through the high windows and the sound of people breathing like they'd finally run out of things to say. I sat straight, both feet down, my hand around a pen I didn't plan to use. Ruiz leaned my way and kept his voice low. "Whatever happens, you've already told the truth." I nodded once and felt my shoulders loosen a notch I hadn't noticed was tight. The side door clicked. Judge Keller stepped out, robe neat, hair pulled back, eyes steady. She didn't carry the crisp edge she had on earlier days. It was a quieter weight, like the room owed her a full minute of silence before anyone started. She settled behind the bench. "Before we move to verdict," she said, even and clear, "this court has a reflection to make." Everything stilled. Grant lifted his head. His mouth pressed a hard line. Lillian blinked too fast and reset her posture, chin up, hands folded like she didn't need the table under them. Keller looked at them both, then let her gaze find me. I held it. My pulse ticked, steady and present. "We tried a will," Keller said, "but we also witnessed a family." She set her pen down and laced her fingers together. "I've sat on this bench 15 years. I've ruled on greed, neglect, and silence disguised as grace." She turned toward Lillian and didn't soften. "This case carries all three." Lillian straightened, her voice clipped. "It dishonors his name." Keller didn't flinch. "What dishonors a name isn't who it's given to, Mrs. Ward," she said. "It's what we do while it's ours." She shifted her focus to Grant. "And inheritance isn't ownership. It's memory made visible." Grant looked at the tabletop like there was a riddle only he could see. His fingers curled against the wood, then flattened. He didn't argue. He just held still, the way people do when they know the ground's moved and there's no good place to step. Keller's eyes came back to me. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Your aunt worked beside me at Riverside Clinic years ago," she said. "She didn't have much. She stayed late. She fed the volunteers. She called patients by their first names." A pause opened and held. "She taught me something simple. Love is a practice, not a posture." I felt heat climb my throat and settle under my eyes, not like shame, more like a match lit to warm a cold room. I breathed through it. My hands stayed quiet on the table. Keller lifted her chin, voice steady. "To Mrs. Ward and Mr. Grant, neglect isn't love dressed in pearls. It's neglect." The line didn't come with venom.
It came with fact. Lillian's... I didn't answer. My throat burned. I didn't want to cry here. I set my thumb along the groove in the pen and counted a breath in, a breath out. The heat shifted into something calmer. My jaw let go. Keller closed the file in front of her and pushed the paper aside. "This court values acts of care over claims of status," she said. "We all saw the exhibits. We heard the experts. We heard the witness who carried the house on her back. But what stayed with this court," she tapped the bench once with her index finger, light but firm, "was who stayed when it was hardest." Lillian's laugh came out small and sharp. "This is a sympathy show." No one joined her. Grant put a hand over hers, awkward, like he was borrowing a gesture he'd seen, not one he used. He didn't look my way. He didn't look at the judge. He stared at the spot where his fingers touched his mother's and kept them there, like it might count for something. Keller let the comment die on its own. She didn't feed it. She looked down the length of the room and then back at us. "Tomorrow we deliver the judgment," she said. "Today we remember what it's for." The words settled into the wood, into the old air, into the line of my spine. I didn't feel triumph, not pride either, just a right-sized feeling, like standing where your feet actually fit. Ruiz tilted his head toward me. "Breathe," he said, barely sound. "You did what you came to do." I nodded, voice low. He'd want it said this way. He didn't ask who. He knew. I glanced at the gavel, not for power but for quiet. It looked smaller than I expected from the back rows. Up close, it looked like what it is, a tool that does a single job when you ask it to. The gallery stutter. People stood the way they do at the end of a long service, slow, careful, polite about knees and bags and elbows. No one rushed the aisle. A reporter slid a recorder into a bag and didn't hit the button. Shoes tapped the floor, soft as rain you almost can't hear until it stops. Lillian turned her face away so I wouldn't see the wet at the corner of her eye. She lifted her chin and tried to smile. The shape of it hurt to look at. Grant's hand stayed on hers for one more second, then he pulled it back and folded both hands flat like he'd been taught to pray and forgot the words. I gathered my folder and smoothed. People began to file out. I didn't move right away. I watched the light on the floorboards, the way it pooled and edged toward the door, and then I stood. Ruiz stepped back to give me space. We didn't talk. We didn't plan our next 5 moves. We breathed and let the morning be what it was, a clean, quiet line between what had been said and what would be decided. I turned toward the aisle, and the room opened before me, not like a stage, but like a hallway to the next thing. My legs felt steady, my hands were calm. I walked without rushing, every step present, every step mine. The courtroom looked brighter that morning. Maybe it was the sunlight cutting clean through the high windows. Maybe it was just the quiet. It felt lighter, like someone had finally opened a window in a house that had been sealed too long. Every seat was taken, but nobody spoke above a whisper. Even the rustle of paper sounded careful. I sat between Ruiz and the soft hum of the ceiling fan. My palms rested on my lap, steady but warm. He leaned close enough for me to catch his cologne, something faint and familiar. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yes. Whatever it is, it's already done." He didn't press. He never did. The clerk stood. "All rise." Chairs scraped in slow motion. Judge Keller stepped out from chambers, robe black, expression calm. She looked like someone who'd spent the night thinking and had decided what mattered. When she took her seat, the whole room seemed to exhale. "This court," she began, "has reviewed all testimony, all exhibits, and all expert evaluations." Her voice didn't rise or fall. It was plain, certain, like a line drawn on paper that wouldn't waver. "After review of handwriting analysis, medical assessments, and witness statements," she continued, "the court finds no evidence of undue influence." Silence followed. Not shock, just the kind of stillness that comes when the weight shifts to one side for good. "The will of Thomas Ward stands as written," she said. "Case dismissed." The words landed soft but final. A sound escaped from Lillian, half a breath, half a gasp. Her shoulders pulled back like she'd been struck, then froze. She turned slightly toward Grant, voice low, breaking on the edge. He chose her. Grant didn't answer. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed somewhere far ahead. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, just something small. Recognition, maybe, or surrender. Ruiz didn't smile. He reached across the table, his hand palm up, quiet, steady. I placed mine in his for half a second, then let go. He nodded once, the kind of nod that meant it's over. No one clapped. No one gasped. The noise that followed wasn't noise at all. Just air moving again after too long a hold. I looked down at the table, saw my father's name printed cleanly across the judgment sheet. The ink caught a bit of light. I placed my fingers over it, not to claim it, just to feel the truth of it. The wood under my skin felt warm. Keller gathered her papers into a neat stack, then spoke again, her tone softer. This court appreciates the dignity maintained by both parties. Her eyes met mine for a moment, a human moment, not a judge's. Ms. Bennett, she said, you honored your father. That's all any of us can do. I held her gaze and gave the smallest nod I could manage. Then she stood, nodded once to the clerk, and left through the same door she'd come in from. The sound of her shoes against the floor was the last thing anyone heard for a while. Reporters didn't rush to the front. No one called out questions. They just shifted in their seats, pens moving slowly. One of them whispered to another. She never flinched. A camera clicked once and stopped. No flash, no frenzy, just a quiet record of something that didn't need performance. From behind me, someone murmured, "Guess money doesn't always lie." Lillian stood, her face pale but carefully arranged. She smoothed her jacket with both hands, though it didn't need it. The tremor in her fingers betrayed her. Grant stayed seated. He didn't look up, didn't move, just stared at the table. I think he finally understood what silence costs. Ruiz exhaled beside me. He'd be proud, he said quietly. I looked at the bench, now empty, the light falling across the grain of the wood. He already was. Ruiz smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind that comes when something right finally finds its place. Let's get out of here, he said, gathering the last of the folders. We walked the aisle slowly. People moved aside, some nodding as I passed. It wasn't pity, it wasn't admiration either. It was something else. Recognition, the kind that doesn't need words. At the doorway, the sunlight hit me full in the face, bright, steady, unfiltered. For the first time in months, I didn't brace against it. The courthouse steps smelled like magnolia and clean stone. Savannah after rain always carried that sweetness that stuck to the air. The reporters waited at the bottom but didn't push forward. They looked almost tired too. One called out, gentle, "Miss Bennett, how does it feel to—" I turned back toward the street. "I'll walk," I said. "Feels better that way." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. "See you soon," he said. Yeah. The city sounded normal again. Horns, footsteps, birds, a street vendor shouting about peaches down the block. I touched my chest, right where the compass sat beneath the fabric. The metal was warm against my skin. It didn't need to point north anymore. It had already done its job. I walked toward the gate, down the long path of sun and shade. A little boy stood there, tugging at his mother's hand, eyes wide. "Who is she?" he asked. His mother smiled, not at me, but toward me. "Someone who told the truth." The words followed me, light and clean. I kept walking. My steps felt sure, not rehearsed. No cameras, no noise, just the rhythm of heels on pavement and the soft hum of life picking up again. Halfway down the block, I paused and looked back once. The courthouse stood tall against the morning light, windows glinting gold. The same building that had watched me walk in, small, now looked less like judgment and more like peace. I took a long breath, in, out, and kept going. By the time I turned the corner, the street was almost empty. I passed the cafe where I used to grab coffee before night shifts, and the smell of roasted beans mixed with wet pavement. For the first time, I didn't feel like the city was looking at me. It was just there, open, ordinary, mine again. At the next crosswalk, my phone buzzed with messages, news alerts, a few names I didn't care to read. I silenced it. I didn't need to hear what the world had decided to call me. A week later, When the house was quiet and the noise had faded back into background life, an envelope arrived at my door, cream-colored, embossed, and stamped with the seal of the Georgia Judicial Council. I turned it over in my hands and smiled. Whatever waited inside, I was ready. 6 months later, my name sat on a glass door. Judge Maya Bennett, Family Mediation Division. The letters weren't grand, just neat and gold, the kind that catch light only when you walk by. Every morning I touched them, not for pride, just to make sure they were still there. The office was small, 1 window, 1 desk, 1 plant I kept forgetting to water. Above the bookshelf hung the letter from the Georgia Judicial Council, framed and plain. Beside it sat my father's brass compass, always open, its needle locked north. When the afternoon sun hit it right, the metal glowed warm and quiet, like a heartbeat. Across the street, the Ward Harbor Center had opened. 3 rooms, a tutoring hall, a weekend kitchen that smelled like bread and coffee. Half of my inheritance built it. The rest went to simple things, rent, groceries, quiet mornings. Ruiz came by every Saturday to handle the legal aid desk. "Keeps me honest," he'd say, and I believed him.
My mornings started early. Coffee, court files, the faint buzz of ceiling lights. People came in with papers, but mostly they came in carrying hurt. Some left lighter, some didn't. All of them left hurt. And most days, that felt like enough. Some Sundays, I still drove out to Bonaventure Cemetery with a bundle of gardenias. The path always curved beneath the same oak branches, the air thick with salt and river wind. I'd kneel, clean the plaque, brush off the moss. "Hey, Dad," I'd whisper, "we're okay now." Then I'd leave the flowers and let the quiet finish the sentence. One afternoon, a boy about 9 sat across from me in mediation. He kept his eyes down, fists tight, a bruise fading under his sleeve. The caseworker leaned close and whispered, "He says nobody wants him." I looked at him for a moment, small shoulders, scuffed sneakers, the kind of stillness that hides fear. I leaned forward until my voice reached him. "Then you've found someone who does." He looked up, cautious, like testing if I meant it. For a second, he didn't blink. Then his shoulders dropped a little, just enough to breathe. The caseworker smiled. The air in the room shifted, soft, almost lighter. When they left, I stayed behind, letting the quiet fill the space again. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like purpose, the kind that doesn't need headlines or applause. This, the center, the work, the boy's small nod, this was what the truth had cleared space for. Afternoon light stretched across my desk, turning everything gold. It caught the rim of the compass lid, a thin ring of brightness cutting through the shadow. The needle didn't move. It didn't need to. Direction, once found, doesn't ask to be proved again. I signed the next docket form, the pen moving slow and certain. Somewhere outside, a bell rang. Maybe the ferry, maybe the church downtown. It didn't matter. The sound folded into the city like any other day. Through the open window, I heard laughter from the Ward Harbor Center. Kids shouting, dishes clinking, someone playing music through a bad speaker. It was messy, loud, human. It made me smile. I looked at the compass one last time before turning off the lamp. The needle stayed steady under the dim light, catching. I stood there for a moment, the wind brushing through my hair, cicadas humming somewhere close. It wasn't peace like silence, it was peace like balance. Life still moving, but not against me anymore. I smiled to no one in particular and whispered, just loud enough for the air to carry it, "Family isn't blood, it's presence." And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. What did the quiet claim mean to you? Comment below with your favorite moment or line. And if Maya's journey spoke to you, tap heart, subscribe, and share this story forward, because truth, like family, only grows when it's passed on.